Well, good morning. Thanks very much, Will, and thank you everyone else for being on the line with us this morning. I just want to highlight a couple of things and then happy to open it as always up for questions. So the last 3 or 4 days has been extremely tumultuous and chaotic for the people of Ontario. Of course, we all saw the truly reckless and disastrous announcement made by the Premier last Friday, which included additional measures that nobody with a scientific background was calling for. Initially, this notion of shutting down playgrounds and introducing police state measures here in the province that would have trampled on civil liberties. It was only in the face of a tremendous groundswell of organic grassroots opposition, combined with the lion's share of Ontario's police services telling the Premier he'd gotten it wrong, that we saw a reversal on playgrounds and a little bit of a climb down, not a full climb down, but a bit of a climb down on the additional powers for police. So we know that Doug Ford continues to demonstrate that he's in over his head, that he doesn't have the capacity to do this job properly, that he is not fit to govern the province. That's quite clear because his government is very obviously flailing at this critically important point in time. But there remains an issue that has united every single one of the opposition parties, municipal leaders, doctors, nurses, people right across the spectrum and right across the province. For more than a year, there has been a consistent call for Doug Ford to introduce paid sick leave. Some of you might know that later this week on Thursday, my colleague, MPP Michael Coteau, is scheduled to have his private member's bill on paid sick leave, a bill that, if passed, would provide a provincially funded 10-day paid sick leave program for Ontario's workers, so desperately needed during this critical time. We've also seen over the weekend not rumors, in fact, we know that the government wanted to try to shut down the legislature, and it was the opposition that stood up and said no. We do not want the legislature to stop sitting. We want Michael Coteau's bill to be debated on Thursday. We want it to pass. We have sought on multiple occasions unanimous consent for this legislation. And we know, again, I just want to stress this, we know this is just about the number one ask of everybody, including key members of Doug Ford's own science table. So I am urging Doug Ford, number one, do not recess the legislature prematurely or frankly at all while we continue to deal with this crisis. Let's debate Michael Coteau's bill this Thursday. Let's get it passed. Let's work together, all 4 parties in the legislature, to find a way to make paid sick leave real. In fact, if I was Doug Ford, I'd be sitting in an emergency cabinet meeting right now, telling my cabinet this needs to be done, getting it ready to go, and actually delivering it for the people of Ontario. If Doug Ford's not going to do that, we need a handful of his own Conservative caucus members, many of whom privately have told others they have misgivings about Doug Ford's capacity to lead Ontario at this important point in time. We need to find a way to make this happen because, again, I just want to stress, it's not just politicians calling for this, although all of us have. It is the number one, if not the number one, it's one of the top asks of Ontario's own science table, and it's something Doug Ford needs to do. So do not recess the legislature, work with opposition parties. Let's pass Michael Coteau's private member's bill on this. Let's deliver paid sick leave as one of the most fundamentally important things to get Ontario through this third wave, get the vaccines rolled out, and get to the other side of this ordeal. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions you might have.
All right, just a reminder to please raise your hand using the Zoom function or write to the chat if you have a question. And the first question is Colin DeMello from CTV Toronto.
Hey, good morning, Mr. Del Duca. So what if the government chooses to ignore your plea and chooses to vote against Mr. Coteau's proposed legislation? I mean, time and time again, they've been given the opportunity to implement paid sick days. There have been, I counted, about 9 unanimous consent in the legislature to immediately pass paid sick days, and they've turned down every single attempt. What makes you so sure that this time is going to be different? And what happens if they don't?
So, I'm not entirely sure that this time is different, although I do think that it's quite clear. There's an increasing unhappiness. There's an increasing sense of dissension within Doug Ford's own caucus. I think they're increasingly nervous, and they should be, because they know that Doug Ford's reckless and erratic leadership is actually putting people at risk here in the province right now. I mean, look, I want Doug Ford to do this today. And if he does, I'll be the first, assuming he gets the details right, I'll be the first person to say it was the right thing to do, because we've been calling for this for a year. I was proud to be part of a government that had delivered paid sick leave prior to 2018, prior to Doug Ford getting rid of it. Having said that, it's been really brutal to watch over so many months, while so many Ontarians have suffered and sacrificed, many of whom have gotten sick. Far too many have died tragically, including far too many essential workers or their families because they didn't have paid sick leave. So I think Doug Ford's own caucus is feeling the pressure. Frankly, Colin, I think Doug's feeling a bit of the pressure right now, and he's flailing. So I think in this moment, the very best thing his caucus can do, his cabinet can do, and frankly, Doug Ford can do, is see the light and just work with all of us, work with us on Michael's bill, work with the other two opposition parties to get the details right, and deliver the outcome that we so desperately need. If he chooses not to do it at this point in time, despite all of the calls and all of the evidence, if he chooses to continue to be intransigent or stubborn or ideological on this, we'll just keep fighting and we'll keep pushing. And I'm pretty sure the other two opposition parties will do the same, and we'll use every trick we have in the toolkit to make sure that we are continuing to push for this and find a way to succeed. And fundamentally, this is one of those things that will come back to haunt Doug Ford forever, and frankly, continue to plague the people of Ontario if he doesn't make the switch and do the right thing.
Thank you, Mr. Del Duca. And on Friday, it seemed like, the suggestion to close or to over-police society kind of came out of nowhere. The General should have known whether or not police forces would be on board with something like this or not. I mean, either she didn't do the due diligence and check with the police forces, or she just assumed that they were on board. Should the Solicitor General be fired as a result of that decision that was made on Friday?
Listen, Colin, I obviously don't know what kind of conversations take place in Doug Ford's cabinet. What I do know is that members of his own science table have said this publicly. The decision on the over-policing of society, the trampling of civil liberties, was not something that any science table member, any other doctor that I know of, anybody with any real expertise in this area called for. Where this idea came from, I have no clue. We saw media reports suggesting last week Doug Ford's campaign team was part of the discussion. I don't know where this came from. I don't know if this was, I hate to say this, I don't know if this was some kind of politically driven crass play by him and his team. It was just across the board, completely unnecessary, completely amateurish, and a very demonstrable evidence that Doug Ford is completely unfit to govern the province of Ontario. So should Sylvia Jones have known better or done better due diligence? Yes. Should the Attorney General, as I believe a former member of the Law Society of Upper Canada, had a better grasp of what the charter is supposed to mean, what civil liberties are supposed to be all about? For sure. Should other members of that caucus and cabinet have stood up and told Doug Ford he was going the wrong way? Absolutely. But as I said from the very beginning, the buck does stop with Doug Ford. So this is, by the way, really quickly, this is one of the reasons I called for a COVID czar last week, because we have to stop this exact dynamic. This notion that we get scientific advice, it goes into the black hole of a cabinet meeting. We have no clue who Doug Ford is really listening to, who is whispering in his ear, who is lobbying him, why these things are taking place the way they're taking. This is why this responsibility for getting through the rest of this pandemic needs to be transferred to someone. I've suggested Dr. Steiny Brown or Dr. David Naylor, who's got unimpeachable scientific integrity to get us through to the other side.
Okay, next question is Steve Paikin from TVO.
Good morning, Stephen. You mentioned a couple of times this morning that Tory MPPs are telling you privately that they have the same misgivings you do about Doug Ford's leadership. Can you either name names or tell me how many have suggested so to you?
So I've not spoken with any directly, but certainly over the last number of months, we have heard from a number of different sources, both in and around the legislature, that there are some very serious misgivings. We obviously saw, again, in media reports that one of his MPPs, the member from Scarborough Centre, produced a letter out to the Conservative Party basically suggesting that they had gotten it wrong. We've seen lots of commentary and we've heard a lot of rumors about this. And I've served, obviously, in a caucus and cabinet dynamic. I know it's not easy to speak truth to power, as the saying goes, but people are losing their lives. People are getting sick. The healthcare system is overwhelmed. ICUs are filling up. And Friday was a real turning point, I think, for the people of Ontario, and I believe for a number of people within Doug Ford's caucus. So we're just calling on them to do the right thing. We don't need all of them. We just need a handful of them to agree with paid sick leave to stand up, support Michael Coteau's PMB or private members bill later this week. Let's get it passed and let's move on.
Follow up.
Thanks. Yeah, as a follow-up, you having been in cabinet would know that it is not an infrequent thing for backbenchers to kind of mouth off, for lack of a better expression, even to opposition party members about their status. How do you know this isn't that, and it's really something that rises to a more serious level?
Well, if it was just regular politics, I could agree with the notion that this does happen from time to time for sure in our political dynamic. But again, all of those conservative MPPs represent communities, just like I used to, where, and I hope to again one day, where people are currently getting sick and people are dying. So this isn't just, well, are we raising a speed limit on a highway? Are we building a particular, project or whatever? This is life and death. This is a public health crisis. And so when I'm sure their own constituency offices were flooded, like our caucus members' offices were flooded on Friday and through the weekend with emails and phone calls from people, hundreds, thousands of Ontarians who are outraged with Doug Ford's completely kind of flailing leadership on Friday, the police state powers, closing playgrounds, being completely thwarted, and thank goodness he was, by almost all Ontario police services with his civil liberties overreach. They got to be hearing it and they got to be feeling it. So this is easy for me to say, I suppose, let's take the politics out of it and just think at a humanitarian level. What do you need to do in this moment, in this complete moment of public health crisis like we're having? They got to step up. They have to do the right thing. I hope Doug does it today. I mean, literally, I hope today he convenes a cabinet meeting and says, let's just do paid sick leave. Let's just actually make sure essential workers have what they need. Let's get the vaccines deployed properly. Forget the rest of it. Forget the polling. Forget what his campaign team's telling him. It's life and death. And that's the big difference between this moment and past moments when perhaps backbenchers have been unhappy.
Okay, next question is Natasha McDonald-Dupuis from Radio Canada.
Morning. You're saying that Doug Ford is unfit to govern. What are you going to do if he does not implement paid sick days? Are you going to go as far as to ask him to resign?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, we effectively have been for a number of days. I understand, and what I said last week, I believe it was last Thursday, was we need a COVID czar. So for the balance of this war that we're in, this public health war that we're in, we need to empower. Doug Ford and his government needs to empower an individual, somebody that has incredibly, unimpeachable scientific integrity. There are plenty of folks to pick from on his own science table, many of who provided incredible leadership throughout this pandemic that Doug Ford has ignored. Appoint an individual like that, give them the power, just the way the Allied forces gave Eisenhower the power over D-Day back in the Second World War. Give that power to a COVID czar and get the politics and the cabinet black hole and all of the recklessness out of the decision-making process. If he had done that 6 months ago, 12 months ago, we'd have paid sick leave. We would have safe and healthy classrooms and schools would be open. We'd have a vaccine rollout that would actually be, shooting the water where the flames are burning brightest. We would actually be, like some other provinces in this country, getting through this third wave more successfully than Ontario is. We wouldn't be the international embarrassment, Ontario that is, that we have become, with media reports in the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, and elsewhere, basically calling into question this premier's fitness to serve. So we're going to keep fighting as hard as we can because this is the right thing to do. I am sincerely hopeful that Doug Ford will look in the mirror will find a way to make these kinds of decisions more effectively in the coming hours and days. But if he doesn't, he should step aside. He is not fit to govern this province, and he's clearly in over his head.
Follow up?
No follow-up, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, there are no further questions on the line. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.